to our, I guess what this is the 11th episode of Let's Write Adventure, our live stream where we create a D&D adventure, soup to nuts in real time, step by step, walking through the process and the entire sort of, thought process that goes into making a narrative adventure. So this is really all about the nuts and bolts, digging deep into each segment and why we make the selections we make and what to think about when we're making these selections and so on. So if you're just joining us for the first time, we are working on an adventure that we brainstormed from scratch in episode one, where the characters are hired by the community leader of a town that we now know as Sky Song Gulch, to recover the only known deposit of our MacGuffin, something called cold iron that was once lost in a glacial mine we currently calling the Berg, that was once ravaged by disease, cackle fever in this case. The community needs it to save themselves from the foretold coming of the Bloodgood Sisters, Coven of Hags, and the characters are led to believe the village plans to fight the hags when they recover the cold iron. But when they come back, they discover the village actually intends to use the cold iron to pay off the hags, thus completing an ancient pact. And the party has to decide whether to support empowering the coven with this cold iron or to convince the community to fight back, knowing there's going to be consequences either way. And so last time we were digging into uh, part two of our set of kind of 5 chapter adventure here, and that is our setback. Specifically, we were talking about what occurs during travel between our starting village of Skysong Gulch and the Berg, because travel in D&D is something that is notoriously difficult to to DM, because it doesn't always have a lot of details to it. And so you end up in a situation where it's either tell us, narrate what your character does hour by hour, or you do kind of a travel montage kind of thing, and sprinkle in a few random encounters. And either way, it doesn't capture the feel of real travel and real exploration. We talked a little bit about that in our last episode, our last live stream number 10, where I talked a little bit about some of my real life travels and kind of what, how that experience has taught me to approach this. But in a nutshell, it's that travel should feel, especially travel, I think, in fantasy settings, should feel a little bit more like exploration, where the characters are coming up on things that they have never found before, and they are interacting with them in a real way, and experiencing this in a way that provides them either boons going forward or setbacks. And so we were approaching that um, with one of my favorite techniques, which is one to add a logistics and survival element to travel, where there's a certain distance that we know the characters need to traverse. And I like to write this out in miles as opposed to days, unless there's a good reason to do this in a fixed number of days. Because then that gives the players a little more agency in their decision making process in terms of, well, we're going to do a slow pace, we're going to do a normal pace, we're going to do a fast pace. They can change that up and experience the effects of that. And two, it gets them to think a little bit about the logistics of how much food do we need, how much water do we need, what equipment do we need to bring with us? Are we strong enough to carry this all on our own without being encumbered? Do we need to get pack animals or a wagon or something along those lines? Which I think a lot of DMs kind of avoid some of the minutia there, thinking that it's going to really bog down the game. Um, and with brand new players, sometimes it can. So keep that in mind. But with more experienced players who have a session, have a campaign or two under their belt, tossing this in, I think, adds a level of engagement with the travel that sets you up for a little more success with these sections, where it feels a little bit less, you know, clip scene to, we're walking through the desert, to clip scene to we're traversing a windswept rock bridge, to clip scene where, you know, walking around a narrow ledge of a crumbling gorge or something along those lines. It has more interaction and more choices in it, And choice is really the thing, right? That's going to keep your players engaged. Because if they have to make decisions, they're going to want to think about those decisions. And those decisions have to affect the outcome of what happens next. Not necessarily in terms of plot points, but in how prepared or ill prepared the characters are. So travel is a really great place to do that. And so we set them up with a little bit of wilderness survival kind of stuff here. And one of the things we did in this case was that the um, since the adventure takes place in a kind of a deserty wasteland kind of setting, and the berg itself is a giant glacier and thus extreme cold, I at least think it would be interesting to say that they've got to go through this area of extreme heat in the desert, which affects their how much water they need to bring with them, and knowing that water is limited, and that there is an oasis that they might need to hit, and using the survival checks not so much to say, oh, you either make it to the berg or you don't, but rather you make it to the berg no matter what in terms of your survival checks for navigation. But if you fail, you miss the oasis. If you succeed, you find the oasis. And so, us building in some kind of boon into this oasis as well, which I think is what we're going to focus on today, at least to start. But we also talked about some setbacks that come with travel, or in this instance. And so we were talking about last time the idea of this wasteland being kind of a magical hotspot, right? Because we talked about previously where the berg is this this glacier in the middle of the desert, right? And so that clearly magic was involved in making this happen. So it's kind of on top of a font of magic, and then that'll affect spells when we get into the berg. We'll talk about that at some time in the future. But also, the wasteland itself should have some effects of this purging of magical energy. And so, eldritch storms of some kind, I think, make a really cool kind of feature to a deserty kind of environment. Give it something that's a little more dynamic, um, and might have an impact on the character. So we said that maybe there's a nightly storm that comes through, um, like clockwork from twilight till dawn, and that it's full of these eldritch lightning strikes, and that the lightning itself isn't dangerous to the characters, but rather when they strike, they temporarily animate skeletons. And so throughout the night, the skeletal horde is being, uh, you know, uh, reanimated out of the desolation of this wasteland. And the characters really, their challenge is not so much to fight off this horde as it is to find shelter, a defensible place or place they can hide from the horde. And so instead of running this as a combat encounter, we're running it as almost it's not probably not as technical as a skill challenge, but they make checks to see if they can find appropriate places to shelter based off of their needs, and then if they succeed, then they can get the benefits of a long rest, or they can avoid being seen potentially. They have better chances of getting the benefit of a long or a short rest and avoiding additional damage. If they fail to find a place where they can safely rest for the night, they we kind of do a then we can kind of do a scene cut where they're spend the night fending off the skeletal horde, and while everybody survives in the morning, they did not get a long or short rest. They were up all night and they've taken a little bit of extra damage, and so they're not necessarily threatened with death, but they are threatened with things that will stack up over time if they're not addressed. Exhaustion being a serious threat to the party in this case, and then some accumulation of damage that they might get if they're not able to take long or short rests. It also might slow down their journey through the desert, which could impact the planning. They may run out of food, they might run out of water, which makes the oasis especially important. We really dug into kind of the details of that last time, so I want to summarize it, but I don't want to really rehash the whole darn thing. Um, but today, I want to talk a little bit about the oasis to start. So let's go ahead and work on that. We have here at the end of the encounter something we didn't fill out, which is kind of the threat. Um, I'll be honest. When we fill these out, I kind of put these bullet points in to make sure I'm thinking about the right thing. But to be honest, we've kind of hit the topic of the threat here. You know, this is our, you know, this is the downside of the characters fail. So we don't need to include that later in there unless it's useful to you in your notes to kind of separate that out. Sometimes it is. It makes it, you know, having it in a separate section makes it easier to find at a glance when you're actually running the adventure. So entirely up to you when you do yours. In the meantime, though, let's talk about the Oasis. And I think this is what? Heading 1? Yeah, cool. Heading 1. So let's say the Oasis. And if we can scroll down a little bit. We may decide to give it a name in the future. We may decide to just call it the Oasis, since, you know, there is one theoretically in between. My advice to you on that would be that if this is part of a larger campaign, which if you're writing it yourself, it probably would be, that if the campaign centers in and around this wasteland, where there are probably multiple oases littered throughout, there just is only one that's between Skysong Gulch and the Berg, then I might give it a name. If we just have this one foray into the wasteland, you know, then I'll probably just call it the Oasis. But for the moment, let's just call it the Oasis, and let's see what we come up with here. So the Oasis should be a safe haven. Oasis is a safe haven that marks the halfway point between Skysong Gulch and, well, it helps if I spell that correctly, Skysong Gulch and the Berg. So since it's a safe haven, there should be certain things that are sort of automatic here. So let's say that while resting at the Oasis, creatures are not threatened by the skeletal horde, hordes created by the Eldritch storms detailed above. I'll be honest, when I write for myself, I still sprinkle in like things like detailed above or see above or see below, because it's habit. But let's be honest, if you're writing this for yourself, you don't necessarily need that detail. I work it in there because I write a lot of things for other people, and you want to make sure that they're aware that you're connecting 2 points. You know, you're connecting the encounter to the Oasis. So if you're writing, you know, for something like the DM's Guild or something like that, then work that in. Otherwise, don't sweat it. Moving on. So they have this chance to kind of have this guaranteed ability to rest here, which, you know, is a big boon, because if they didn't get any rest the night before, this will eliminate that level of exhaustion for them and set them up to have an easier time going forward. Because, as we recall, the first level of exhaustion is going to cause disadvantage on ability checks. So things like the survival checks they need to find better places to rest. So it's a big deal for them for your characters to avoid that level of exhaustion. We might also, we should definitely also say that there's fresh water here, because by definition, an oasis in a wasteland should have water. That's kind of the thing, right? Your characters are going to expect that if you call it the Oasis. All right, so there is plenty, let's say, a clear permanent lake offers ample fresh water year round. So things you can do when you're setting up stuff like this. Um, Stuff to keep in mind. If for example we wanted to be maybe a little softer on the characters here, and we wanted to say, okay, well, there's degrees of success. Maybe you don't find the best oasis if you fail the survival check, but let's say you rolled a 10 instead of a 15. Okay, well maybe instead of finding nothing, you find a a seasonal oasis or what have you, or a where yes you can get your long rest, but there's only a little bit of water. There's a few gallons of water that are there, not necessarily enough to replenish your stocks, but enough to add to them a little bit. You could do something like that. And in this case, I think that's a little too in the weeds, so I'm not going to worry about it. But you absolutely could, especially if you're doing a campaign that really, or an adventure that really focuses on the survival element. Um, that's that could be really really useful for you in there, and it could also allow characters that have they kind of lean into the survivalist feel. Your rangers, your druids, sometimes your barbarians, that kind of stuff. That or anybody takes the outlander background, to really make use of that kind of stuff in this setting and making those characters very valuable here. um, One thing that I see a lot when people are writing this is they're trying to think of ways to sort of um, you know counteract potential character advantages here through things like backgrounds or class features, and there's a time and a place for that. I think in general you want to avoid trying to explicitly counteracting a character's um, particular advantage in a situation, because ultimately that player feels really cool when they can pull out a clutch. Well, my background says that I actually can find food for up to 5 characters, and fresh water too if that's available. Because then in this situation, that's the wanderer benefit, part of the wanderer benefit from the outlander background. You know that's really cool in a situation like this, whereas the DM, you go, yeah, absolutely, you find food, that's not a problem, but there's not enough water to be had, and so you're gonna have to find the oasis, and so you get kind of um, you get kind of a cool balanced effect here. Same kind of thing with like Goodberry, right? Like a lot of people will talk about how Goodberry kind of nerfs um, survival play, because the spell itself um, talks about berries. Eating a berry restores 1 hit point, and the berry provides enough nourishment to sustain a creature for 1 day. And if you're interpreting nourishment very loosely, you might say, well, that's enough food and water. Well, the definition of nourishment is the food or other substance necessary for growth or health. So you could argue it that way. Frankly, I mean, I would say it provides you enough food. It doesn't necessarily provide you enough water. So again, that's a place where you can have a balanced approach. But it rewards a character who has spent time preparing that spell, who has, who has sort of spent class features to be able to do this kind of stuff. So in this case, though, I think we're going to say that its permanent lake offers ample fresh water, meaning they can fill up, their stores entirely, and reward them in that way. I might even go so far as to include some treasure here. And I don't necessarily want to get into putting treasure into the like specific treasure items into the adventure just yet. I typically like to wait to the end after I've kind of written everything out, because I'll go through and kind of have an idea of how much treasure I want to sprinkle around. And so I'll take that big pool and kind of segment it up into various places. And we'll talk about that when we get closer to the end of this. But the idea there then is that you don't end up with an adventure that either has way too little treasure or has way too much treasure in it. Because either way, you kind of you do two things with that. One, you put yourself in a situation where maybe your game is going to rapidly become unbalanced, and you're going to have to take great effort to overcome um, the these now magically overpowered characters. Like you're to keep things a challenge for them, you're gonna have to throw a lot of level inappropriate challenges at them. And then two, even if you manage to kind of balance that later on by say you offer too much treasure, too many magic items in one adventure, and so the next you don't really offer that many, it's going to make adventures where they don't get that many magic items feel less satisfying for them. So keeping that um, keeping that quantity of magic items and treasure, you know, at least loosely controlled, um, I think is valuable for one, the just the mechanics of the game, but two, more importantly, the morale of the table. So, but I think it's cool to have some treasure here they might be able to find. Um, maybe not an obvious thing, but let's make it not too difficult. Let's reward them for searching around. So we might say, um, a previous group of adventurers now lost to the wasteland, hid a cache of TK gold and magic items. Oh, magic items. We'll see what this goes in there. At the Oasis or later recovery. Characters who search the Oasis can, let's see here, not can but should discover this cache with a DC. Let's make it relatively easy on it. Let's say 10. If we want to make it a shade more difficult than that, we could say like a 12. But the idea here is not to, make it uber tough for them to find this treasure because they already found the Oasis. So we're adding, one additional extra roll that they need to hit. But maybe we make it a little bit higher than their passive check, so it's not an automatic. Discover with a DC 12. Let's see, wisdom, perception, or intelligence investigation. Check. We might specifically say passive checks will also can also discover cache, because that's kind of the eternal question of passive checks, right? Like, when do they come into play? When are they always active? So if you walk past a secret door that has a DC to find that's lower than your than your passive, do you automatically find it? Or do you have to be looking for some things that are intentionally obscured? That's really up to you. You can run it however you want. I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to do this. I typically run it that it's kind of the difference between concealed or secret, right? So, if a door is concealed, meaning that it is casually hidden from view, but pains have not necessarily taken to really obscure it, I'd say that a passive check finds it, right? If you walk by, and it's high enough. If something is truly secret, meaning that the person who designed it was thinking about the casually observant, in that case, an active check is required to find it. That's just my own personal preference. Again, you can run your game however you like, entirely up to you. I just find for me that strikes a good balance. Cool. All right. So we kind of have our Oasis built out here in terms of the basic features of it here. Hmm. Is there anything we else want to add to this? I don't think it needs to be. Should be a place of respite. Should be. We've already said it's a safe haven, so I don't think it needs to have any kind of other challenge or hazard here. They already had to exert effort to get here, so it's kind of um, mean to go, hey, congratulations, you succeeded a 15, a DC 15 survival check. Now here's your reward. Haha, surprise, it's a combat encounter. That's that's not it's not cool. Um, it's not gonna feel good for most parties. Some of them may love it, but for most. So the only thing I would consider here is maybe a social interaction, right? Like, is there somebody else at this oasis? Um, and if so, where are they coming from? Where are they headed to? How does that interaction benefit the story? Um, Something to consider, and I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. So we're going to put a placeholder. We're going to say, boom, we're going to say social encounter. I like to litter some of that stuff throughout here um, because it can be useful later. So, kind of backing up, you know, big picture here for the moment. When I'm writing an adventure, I if it's going to be part of a larger campaign, and I don't necessarily not necessarily writing a narrative campaign, meaning that you know, adventure a narrative campaign, in a narrative campaign, adventure A leads to adventure B, leads to adventure C, leads to adventure D, and there's a story chain, a very clear plot arc, usually a villain that encompasses the whole thing. That kind of goes runs throughout the whole thing. That drives the character through that story. If I'm making something that's a little more sandboxy, it doesn't mean the individual adventures don't have a plot to them. They do. Um, but they don't necessarily naturally link one into the next, right? Like, so completing this adventure, if we are putting this in a more sandbox kind of world, doesn't mandate the need to go to the next adventure. And there's pros and cons to running your campaigns both ways. So it's really entirely up to you. It's entirely up to your table. Sometimes it's fun to have a sandboxy world where you have some big kind of cornerstone adventures like this, interspersed with a bunch of little ones that are like 5-room kind of dungeon kind of deals. And I got a video coming out next week about a very quickie 5-room dungeon. Like, we're gonna make one in like 20 minutes, kind of thing. And I'll show you how that's done. Um, uh, but there can be that can be really fun to run, especially with characters that players that want to get into downtime and all that kind of stuff. Um, Although when we talk about campaigns a lot online, we talk a lot about the narrative ones, the big sweeping ones that are really like a novel that you play, and those can be a lot of fun too. But when I'm writing something like this, that in my mind is probably going to fit into a more sandboxy kind of world, I will insert hooks to other adventures that I may not have written yet, that I may not have really thought about much yet, but just little places where I can introduce information that the characters might act on later. So, for example, I could have a social encounter in this oasis with with some NPC that provides a story or a map or a key or something or whatever that leads to something unrelated to this adventure, but might give the characters something to investigate after they complete, this adventure when they're ready to move on to the next one. And so it gives me a place to kind of naturally hook them into a different story. So I'm kind of laying track for something that I may or that I might write later if the characters really engage with it. So this seems like a good place for that. So I might put this here, and then we'll say, let's get you back to the screen share. So I might put that here, and we might say book to later adventure. Cool. Um, so I mean, fun, mysterious things are cool to litter in for this. Um, you know, even just meeting somebody that's kind of on their own quest that has nothing to do with the characters. Um, that kind of like, oh, we crossed paths and we talked once, and then later on, you might have them come back looking for the characters and go, oh, remember me? We met this one time, and well, I'm really in dire straits. I don't know how else to turn to. I need some help. You know, that's laying these kind of hooks early makes them feel more organic in the game later, because there's this idea of mysticism, right? That we're or that's the idea of mysticism. There's this sense of sort of um, you know mysticism with the DM, where players will assume that anything anything that you call back to is something that you had planned to call back to, right? And so when you're able to call back to something earlier in the campaign, much later on, the players feel like you've been laying track for a very long time. There's other things going on. It makes the world seem more complicated, and frankly, it makes you seem more mysterious. So always good things to have. Cool. So we may put that in here. We may not. So yeah, I think we got a pretty decent, playable kind of journey to the Burg. Journey to the. We've been calling it the Burg, not lowercase t, but the Burg. Cool. So we got about 30 more minutes. So let's get back into the Burg and let's flesh out a couple of these rooms that are in here. Because, like I said in our last live stream, we've got the key points in here. So yes, there's a lot left to flesh out, but we've got really the core elements that if we're really in a pinch, we could kind of make up the rest as we went along, and it would, and this adventure would still flow, it'd still work. But we got the time, so let's do some fun. Let's do just some fun little stuff in here. Let's see what kind of jumps out at us. I've talked about this before, and I'm gonna do it here because I think it just amuses me. And this is the idea of putting stuff in putting stuff in little otherwise useless rooms. Because there's a whole bunch of little rooms that you can add to a castle or what have you that would technically be there, but that narratively don't necessarily add anything. And there's two schools of thought: either put them in there for some verisimilitude and to make it feel like it's a real space, or leave them out because they don't benefit the story in any way. I like to put them in and add little little boons or little banes in there, stuff that the characters can ignore if they want, but they engage with. Sometimes they get something cool. And my favorite one to do there is the privy, right? So let's do. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel on this. I'm going to show you one of my favorite things to do here. So this room served as a privy for the servants and common folk of the Burg, as a, let's say, communal common folk of the Burg. And then I'm going to say, let's make a bullet point here. Let's say encounter. And we have third level characters for this. So let's get up to our encounter builder site. You know what? Let's just go to Xanathar's. Let's not muck about. Let's go to Xanathar's and go to our encounter builder. And this is rapidly becoming my favorite way to build encounters. I've gone back and forth for a long time. So let's say we're kind of targeting for adventurers, their third level. So we could do a kind of a medium difficulty encounter of a solo monster of 3 or higher. We could do a couple different monsters that are maybe 1/2 challenge rating, or maybe one level 1 challenge rating. So let's kind of now with that in mind, let's muck about. Let's see what we can find. I did just say let's not muck about. Let's not muck about, but let's explore. How about that? I'm a big fan of putting things in places like this that are perhaps a little unexpected, but seem. But when you think about it for a minute, it seems appropriate. So stuff like oozes, I think are really good for that kind of stuff. Um, Also, plants, um, especially in a place like this where we might have, um, kind of mold or fungus kind of growing about here, um, because D&D doesn't really differentiate between fungus and plants. Um, so I'm gonna limit my resources here. I'm gonna make this. We're gonna strip it down and kind of see what we've got. And I said I want a challenge rating of either to 1/2 to 3. So let's do that. Kind of see what's available, and let's queue this up to. Let's put this in an order that's usable to us. Gray ooze. Okay, that could be interesting. Um, Especially the ability to corrode metal. Um, that could be something that is perhaps very dangerous to our players, especially where they are so far away from a civilization where they could um, repurchase weapons, but also in a fortress where they might be able to find weapons stored throughout. So that actually could lead to a very interesting situation for them where they've got to, where they might lose weapons temporarily, but then have to kind of go searching about to find replacements. Add a layer of complexity to this. So I kind of like oozes. Let's keep the gray ooze in mind because we could have 4 of them in there. Um, you know, um, you can do the psychic gray ooze if you want. I don't. Yeah, that could work here with the magical energy that kind of suffuses this. Um, Keep that in mind as well. That might be. I can't decide if that's more or less fun. Um, Ochre jellies, that could be good. The split, I think, is fun narratively, mechanically. Sometimes I think it's a pain in the butt to run because you're managing a lot as a DM in combat, and staying on top of that sometimes is difficult. Although if you just have one of them and then it becomes 2 and so on, that could be interesting. I don't know if they're more fun than Grey Ooze, though, for this kind of situation the players are going to be in. We could have, you know, not true myconids because they're sentient beings, right? Like, but we could kind of reskin them so that they're a different kind of, inert fungus in here and have a combat encounter with that. That could be interesting. Gelatinous cube doesn't sound as fun to me for this. I think they're really useful for some stuff. I don't know that I necessarily like them in this space here. We also could go outside of monsters entirely and go to another little fun section of the DMG, and where we go to dungeons. So that's kind of where we are, and we can go all the way down to dungeon hazards. There we go, dungeon hazards, where we can do things like um, uh, brown mold that feeds on warmth, though. Yeah, it wouldn't. patch of brown mold exposed to an effect that deals cool damage is easily destroyed. So the brown mold wouldn't work there. Um, let's see here. Green slime is a possibility. That could be useful in here. Webs don't work for this, I don't think. Spiders aren't really, they don't really fit this. Yellow mold, maybe. Creature, I like yellow mold, but I think I want to, because any amount, sunlight or any amount of fire damage, I think I want to save that for later. I want to put that somewhere else. So let's, yeah, so let's go with our gray ooze here. The question is psychic or not psychic? Let's see here. I think not psychic in this case because I want to force that corrosion, right? So let's go gray ooze, and we don't want this to be a deadly encounter. We want this to be a moderate encounter. So let's say 4 gray oozes. Let's say 4 GRAY. And let's go ahead and get that copied. Let's see, 4 gray oozes inhabit the abandoned chamber pots of this space. They appear as oily, fetid water and attack any creature that comes within 5 feet. We'll say that for now. Gray oozes, and let's link this appropriately for ourselves. And gray ooze, cool. And this is a space that if we're gonna put a rando little encounter in here, let's also put a little placeholder for some treasure. Say TK. It's here. The privy also holds TK treasure. Previously hidden by we can just say, we don't need to give a story. Holds hidden behind the chamber pots. Cool. Yeah, so we'll give them a little bit of something, a little bit of reward for poking around in here. We do that. Okay, that's cool. Let's find another little quickie one that we can toss in here. The equipment stores. If we've got gray oozes, we definitely want to put something in here. This room holds a selection of weapons, armor, to support the fortress is garrison. In this room, characters find. So, two schools of thought here. You can outline specifically what equipment is found here, what weapons and armor, and that can be fun to kind of put a situation where maybe a character needs to replace a weapon and they've got to go use something that's different from what they would normally use. Um, or you can just say, hey, it's holds any of the an assortment of weapons and armor found in the player's handbook up to value, whatever. Um, if I'm feeling lazy, typically I will do that. Otherwise, I will kind of outline what I'll look at kind of what equipment the other creatures in the space have. I think for today, we're going to say, I think we're just going to do we're going to do the easy, we're going to hit the easy button on this. So let's go real quick to our player's handbook. Let's just kind of go to armor and weapons and just kind of give a quick, what's the point value? What's the coin value and everything? Yeah, let's maybe up to 75 gold pieces. Kind of covers just about anything. Yeah, let's do that. Why not? We can always dial it back if we need to find find any weapons or armor listed in the PHB worth 75 GP or less. Cool. Make that simple. Let them kind of choose what they find in there. We can also say that the door to this room is locked. And we will describe later on what it takes to get into locked doors in our door section here. Instead of listing out the DC on every single room that might be locked, I will usually just list that in the general features. Unless there's something unique about the lock here. But I think it's locked. I don't think it's trapped. We can say the cold iron storage key held by the, what do we call him? Garrison commander. Commander and area number, because we haven't given that area yet. Also opens this room. Cool. That makes that simple too. It also rewards the characters for having already kind of gotten that key. So that's nice and easy there. I don't think we need to put a combat encounter or a hazard in that place. I think it's enough for it to be kind of a spot that is just kind of a reward, a little boon. I mean, if we wanted to muck about, we could put something like dust methods in there and maybe reskin them to rust. So they're in there, kind of living off of the rust that's in that place. You could put a rust monster in there, feeding on some of the rusty armor or what have you. But I don't necessarily see the point in overstocking this dungeon with encounters. And I'd like to sprinkle some other encounters kind of around this place. We don't need too many in the mine level because we kind of got the whole deal with the ghouls. And then we've got the forge and all that jazz. So I don't know that we need to put a whole lot in there. Although, as long as we're on the topic of dust methods, that could be interesting to put them in the crude ore storage. Kind of like that. What's the... let's reset all those filters and let's see what their challenge rating is. Method. Is it IT? Is it ET? It's IT. Sweet. Yeah, they're half. Cool. Methods are another little beastie that I like putting into stuff, specifically because of this, breath weapon they get and their kind of death burst. Because they're not overly tough, but they could be just a pain in the butt in a fight. So let's sprinkle in a couple of those. This dusty dirty room holds enormous piles of unprocessed ore. Among the piles, again, we don't need to make this overly taxing. Maybe this is an easy fight. It's good to have a few easy fights in here. It keeps things mixed up. So maybe we say, instead of 4, we say we got 3 dust methods. Play in the play in the stones. Let's say play in the dirt. We'll say the dirt. You know, and we also don't have to have every monster attack, right? You know, sometimes monsters are not always interested in killing and eating or stealing from the party. They might be interested in something else. For example, amusement. Little elementals like dust methods, you know, they might just be more interested in getting amusement out of the party than they are in damaging them. And so maybe they fight to defend themselves, but they might also try to play tricks on the party, offering a blend of helpful advice and maybe misleading them. So that's something to consider here as well. Let's, did I copy that link? Let's copy that. And then link them here. Dirt. No, dismiss you. Cool. So yeah, I kind of like the idea of maybe making this not automatically a combat encounter. The methods are, let's see here, tricksters, but not aggressive. They can offer insight. Well, they can say they can offer useful information as well as misleading guidance to creatures who ask. Ooh, what if we made this kind of a 2 truths and a lie kind of deal, where we might say, creatures who speak with the methods must make a, let's say, who request information from the methods must make a charisma persuasion check. Let's make this a middle in DC. Let's say DC 13 charisma persuasion check. On a, let's say here, on a success, each method tells the party some piece of information 2 of the methods tell the truth, while the third lies. On a failure, each method tells party some piece of information. One method tells the truth, while the other 2 lie. So the party gets information either way, and if they succeed, they get 2 bits of useful information and 1 potentially dangerous bit of information. And if they fail, they get 2 pieces of dangerous information and 1 useful information. And then they can use their insight checks to kind of try to figure out what's what. Although as a DM, I wouldn't prompt them to make insight checks. I would let the players suggest that for their characters, and then allow them to do that against the methods deception roll. But yeah, that can be fun because it gives you some flexibility. You have to think on your feet a little bit for this, depending on what the players ask. But maybe they ask about where the keys are or something like that, and one of the lies can send them to some other hazard we've sprinkled around the dungeon, some other dangerous room. Which means that we should probably make at least 2 more make at least 2 of these rooms fairly threatening, that don't result in a key. Maybe one room that's got a trap of some kind, another room that's a combat encounter kind of deal, but a place that makes it easy for, if you they get a failure and you get 2 lies, places that the methods can direct them. Because you're not going to be able to anticipate everything that the characters are going to ask of the methods, but we can anticipate that one of the major things they're going to ask is, where's the cold iron? Where's the cold iron kept? Or where are the keys for the cold iron storage? Or how do I find? How do we access the cold iron? These are the kind of things that that the characters are likely to kind of ask, and we can kind of mentally have our lies prepared for those. And so when we're writing this, we can set up places that make that a little bit easier. So let's make a note to ourselves, because we're kind of running out of time here. Let's see here. Let's say the other 2 lie. Let's say comment, and let's say create 2 danger points within Berg with little or no payout. Put that there. Cool. To remind ourselves. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So anything we can do when we're kind of setting these up to create situations where the characters have to make choices adds to agency, and then we can't always anticipate the outcomes of those choices, because your players are going to they're going to think of things that you never did because they're approaching this from a different mindset. But we can put ourselves in their shoes and think about some of the stuff that they might look into, and be prepared with that information. Something that I might do when I run this is that the methods will only give a limited amount of information. They might allow the characters to ask, a couple questions, one or even just one general question, and then refuse to answer the others before kind of giggling and disappearing. And then they might follow them around to see how things play out. So this adds a little place where maybe they can get some help, maybe they can't. Maybe they get some hurt, which again, player choice, always fun in here. Cool. All right. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of this session of Let's Write an Adventure. Thank you so much for joining me today. As always, if you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Hit that little bell icon so that you never miss a video. Um, but in all seriousness, it's been lovely doing this with you guys. I saw my last session is got way more views than any of the other live streams I've done. So thank you all so much for supporting that and liking that and engaging with that. It really means a lot to me. Helps me keeps me motivated to do this, and it's just really fun to interact with all of you. So thank you for that. Um, and then if you're interested in seeing kind of how I write a very brief 5-room dungeon, something that's just kind of a one session kind of deal, easy to sprinkle around, I'm gonna have a video coming out later this week for that, for an adventure I'm calling the Sanguine Chapel, which is currently available on the DM's Guild, along with my other full narrative adventure, Plague Breakers, which is similar to kind of, well, not similar to this adventure in style, but similar in sort of the construction. And I went through these same steps to craft that fully rendered adventure. That's available for free on the DM's Guild if you want to go ahead and download that. You can check out the link in the description of this video. But otherwise, thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session next week. And that is, what is that? That's going to be the 18th, so Saturday the 18th. And I'll see you guys then. Thank you so much.